Thank you for coming. I hope you've enjoyed your weekend at Animation First. It's been a great weekend of films and immersive experiences and VR and panels and discussions. I want to thank the Italian Institute for all the supports for bringing Lorenzo Mattotti with us this weekend. I'm glad we partnered together to show his film also on Friday night, so thank you so much. This afternoon, we are thrilled to welcome back illustrator, comic book artist, and painter and filmmaker Lorenzo Mattotti for a discussion about his rich and diverse career. Mattotti has published a dozen of comic books since his breakthrough first book, Fiocchi, in 1984, which received many international awards. In 2002, he received the prestigious Eisner Award for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and his drawings have appeared in many publications across Europe and closer to home here in New York, in The New Yorker. Mattotti illustrated several children's books as well, and his work was featured in many solo exhibits, including more recently the Museo di Porta Romana in Milan. And in 2010, he also collaborated with Lou Reed on The Raven. 2012. He also made films, including the films that we just showed last night, 2 nights ago, which was his first feature film. But it also made an episode in a wonderful black and white series of films called Peur du Noir in 2007. It's something that you can find online. I really recommend them. I'm so glad you're here, Lorenzo, and I'm also glad to welcome Françoise Mouly, who is the art director of The New Yorker and also a very dear friend of Lorenzo, and Ellen Sauchek will also translate. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, it's indeed a pleasure, and because we have known each other for decades.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And with Lorenzo Mattotti, one of the difficulties is choosing of all the different projects. As you've heard, Lorenzo does paintings and drawings and films and comics, and there's probably not one artistic endeavor that he doesn't do. And he's brought a few slides, so we will try to touch upon some aspects of what Lorenzo does in the world of illustration. And then he also has a few slides. I assume some of you might be interested in animated films, so he has a few slides about the making of his film. As illustration is a parallel career for you, because you started, the thing you studied was architecture. Yeah. And why did you not become an architect?
No, ciao tout le monde, everybody. Sorry for my English, very macaronic English. So I have help for translate, but also Françoise, she's French, so she can help me. I never wanted to make architecture. I knew I wanted to make illustrator or comics author. So, but in this period, very long time, there were not school in Italy of illustration on comics. We didn't know how to begin to be a comic artist. So many of artists, comic artists, made architecture. Altan, Krepax, many big masters. In fact, I wanted to stay in Venice. I wanted to study in Venice. I tried to make l'Accademia Beaux-Arts, how do you say? Fine Arts Academy. They didn't took me because I had to make the examination. And so I have seen architecture. I have seen yes, yeah. And there were many art of it. So I decided to make architecture. But in fact, I think it was good because I learned many things. many things that probably in this period they were conceptual art. In the academic, they didn't make so much. So I learned many things, and I knew that I never made architect. So I took all the subject I like, I took for try to make an illustrator or comic artist. Here,
yes,
that you are looking.
yeah. Go ahead.
So I started like a comic artist. I made some books. Someone is very important, Fires, that gave me the notoriety.
So that's Lorenzo's first book of graphic novel, is what we would call it now.
Graphic novel, yes.
Because the term didn't exist then. It was bande dessinée. And I remember I was publishing a magazine of comics and graphics with my husband, Art Spiegelman, at the time in the 80s.
Yeah, but you make so many things. In the Raw magazine, she was the...
But we certainly were very startled by Lorenzo's work. It was singular, it was beautifully designed, but it also had the narrative storytelling. So the way he was doing his breakdowns, the way he was telling his story was very influential for many artists, and his use of color was extraordinary. I mean, you can see that in his illustration and in the many different styles over here.
Yes, and so this is really my first work like illustrator. In fact, after Fires, me and other friends, artists, comic artists, began to be trendy in Italy, you know? Young artists, very trendy. So there were a magazine, a fashion magazine, that was specialized in illustration of fashion illustration. The name was Vanity, not Vanity Fair, but it was done by Condé Nast. And they have seen our work, and so they choose to make a special number about comic artists. And they ask to all us to make some fashion illustrations. I knew anything about fashion. And I was listening, what hell I go to make for fashion, you know? They gave me 2 or 3 photos, very bad photos with the dresses on the roof, Polaroid photos, and they make us 2 illustrations, please, and they put in the magazine. So I told to myself, oh my God, well, I go to do what I can do, but it's the first and the last time I will do fashion illustration. You know? So I start with the first images you have seen. I did this one, another one, and in fact, the director, he liked so much that asked me the cover of the magazine for 2 days after, for tomorrow. He say, oh, I like so much your work. Can you make the cover?
It's actually highly unusual, especially at the time, because almost all fashion magazine, all magazine put photos on their covers.
Yes,
so
this was...
It made Vanity really stand out, and your work really stand out.
Yes, and so I thought, oh my God, well, I can do that. And I did. And in fact, after this, the director, I started a collaboration for 4 or 5 years for this magazine. It was a 3-month magazine, no? Every 3 months.
3 months.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Quarterly. Thank you.
Yes, and so really I learned a profession that I never did before. And it was very important to be on time. It was very hard because when they started to ask the illustration, they gave me, I don't know, 3 double pages and 4 pages in 1 week, you know.
Yeah,
so
I remember doing this when I started at the New Yorker. I've been the art editor since 1993.
Yeah.
We did our first special issue was a fashion issue, and it actually had a cover by Lorenzo as well as a portfolio of like a couple of spreads inside. And same thing, like it was very new for us at the New Yorker, but we sent you to the fashion shows. And then we had the messenger service waiting for your drawings. I mean, it just felt
yes,
like
is a
photojournalism.
you
almost.
must be very quick. So I learned to be quick, to have one idea must be the good one. You don't have the time to make sketches and so draw very quick in a way, very efficacious.
Yeah, very effective. Yeah,
effective, and it was quite very interesting because in the magazine we were really free, like a photograph, to for the interpretation of the dresses. Sometimes you have seen before, maybe there were a sort of primitives before no, yeah. I have seen passing this one, please. Yes, this one is a very strange illustration for fashion. But in this period, it was also this magazine was very trendy, and they experiment many things. So for a period, this was a number about primitivism. All the relation with the primitivism art. So we were not obliged to make the beautiful women or not. We could use a totem or sculpture on. So we made many references, artistic references in this magazine. So it was quite, and I enjoy myself. I learned so much. I learned so much to draw about fashion, about dresses. And so this was really my first really profession.
I would suggest, like I'm often asked, you know, what do you suggest for young artists who are starting out? I would say follow Lorenzo. Like first, go to architecture school because it's an excellent training. Don't become an architect, but just learn how to think of like very complex problem and come up with a master idea, une idée maîtresse, and then you
Also you are architect.
Yeah. I studied architecture. I think it's great training. And then spend like 4 or 5 years like doing fashion illustration and also on tight deadline. And then you also have to distill the details and like bad photos and things flash so many different images into like a couple of striking images and get the idea behind, you know. That's, in that sense, Lorenzo is a cartoonist because it's not just the style, but it's also finding an idea in each image. I see that we have some children's books as well.
Yes, children's books. After this experience, they continue in parallel. Yeah, in the same time, I started to make classic illustration for children. There were the editor, French editor, that asked me to make a classic, and so I did 2 images of Pinocchio for an exhibition. Sometimes you always like after we arrive to answer Gretel, but sometimes there are many coincidences, and so I did 2 images of Pinocchio because some friend of mine make a big exhibition for new illustrator to make classic children. So I did Pinocchio, and this editor, French editor, asked me, well, now you make all the book, please. So I make Pinocchio. Pinocchio is really a classic of Italian literature, and is so strong, like a book. You know, there is a sort of a realistic story, But another way, face of Pinocchio is very surrealistic, very visionary, is very strange. It's really a very rich books. And so for me it was to make a really classic. I went to see many, it was illustrated by many artists, Pinocchio. So I went to see many of these illustrators, and I wanted to be in the traditional way to make a book of
I think
children.
that would be the next recommendation, is like learn the history of your medium, you know. And
Yes,
Lorenzo is
try
talking
to make
about-
the classic.
and also like read and spend time with stories, because picture making is one thing, but for somebody like Lorenzo, it's storytelling that he's interested in. It's like how to tell.
Yes, how to
tales that
organize the images, how in one image, Illustrator is different of comics. You must concentrate a strong images, a strong narration, but in one images. And evoke, for me, the images must evoke something. Evoke, give the possibility to the reader, to the lector, to imagine, to imagine. Don't give him everything.
Yes, I think, you know, this is actually what...
Now we arrive.
Now we're like the first covers that Lorenzo did for the New Yorker. As soon as I became art editor, I called upon him.
92.
In 93, yeah. And in the spring of 93.
93.
And what was wonderful is that this one as a New Yorker cover idea couldn't have been described in words, really. It's a visual idea of this man holding his head in the midst of this either Venice type New York. But it worked perfectly to open up the kind of images that could be on the New Yorker, that are not just anecdotal or reportorial, but are also like the feeling of New York.
And it's very strange, because when Françoise asked me to try to make a cover of the New Yorker, I really didn't know what to do, you know. I didn't know so much New York. I have seen many covers of the New Yorker. And there is a very strange story in this, how the coincidence and the idea come out. This little draw up, it was always in my bedroom, because it was a gift I gave to my wife, a little draw that I gave to Rina. And when we married, we put this little draw on the wall. And everybody I woke up, I say, oh, it's a good draw. And always I was looking him to the possibility to make three-dimensional sculpture. You know, you have seen that is very line. No, is a line.
Yeah,
and
that's another thing that, you know, you've been very apt at, is like letting your pen run on paper and looking at what you draw and then finding the ideas in it, as opposed to deciding beforehand. Like many of your works, like Garlandia, like you just draw and draw and draw and draw, and then you look at it and find the story.
But in the end, I always thought, one day I will use these images. One day I will use. And when the New Yorker asked me, I say, why not to make a sort of statue of Liberty statue made by the Chirico, you know, a sort of metaphysic could be, is on the water. So I put behind a skyline of a skyscraper, and I put some boat, and I started to make the volume. And I remember I sent you this draw. So she has seen the draw, she say, well, it's okay. For me, it was completely crazy idea. I think it's the most free cover I never did.
Yeah, I think it's
in a way.
it's the freest cover anybody ever did for the New Yorker.
Yes.
But it was a perfect timing because
Yes.
I was brought in by Tina Brown, whose mandate was to renew and open up what the magazine could be. And certainly this was one way to open it up. I'm just going to move through. This was a cover by Lorenzo, Vivian Westwood outfit that we had on the fashion issue.
And
this
every
was the images
in
inside.
this period, every images you see, they have a very story incredible. I remember
which
for
we
this,
will not go through because I also
but it's
wanna
for
get
very
to-
long story. You must think that in this period there were not in internet. There were not the possibility to scan images. The only thing we have is the fax.
That's true. Yeah.
The fax. And
Black
so,
and white and pretty.
and I
high
was
color.
living in a little town in Italy, so to give to the original of the New York, to go to New York, must occur a
courier.
driver.
Yeah.
A driver come
Hermes
from
was there
Milan
with his,
to
sandals.
the Udine. It's 450 kilometers. Take this little draw, go to Milan, by plane go to Paris, and with the Concorde, go to Paris in time to be
thinking back of the
published.
carbon footprint.
It was very expensive, and there is a really crazy story behind, but it's too long because we didn't have photos of the draw of the Vivian Westwood. So I had to ask to my friend in Condé Nast, where I work for Vanity, if they could give me some diapo of the images to be able to draw. So, but it works. Luckily, it works.
So
It was
another takeaway, like don't hesitate to take chances and accept crazy assignments and impossible deadline. This was Lorenzo's cover for an issue that we
Oscar
did
night, yeah.
around the time of the Oscars. Like
The cinema.
I talk to artists as a conversation, either ideas that they have or themes that are in the calendar. Like we just ran a cover by Malika Favre about the Oscars on the week leading to the Oscar night. And this is more images.
They are very different.
Yeah, this is like
These
a
are
kind- yeah.
illustrations inside the magazine.
Yeah, at the time I asked Lorenzo not just to do fashion and beautiful covers, but also to deal with topics. This was the article by Philip
Rwanda.
Gorovich about
Yeah,
Rwanda. That was the first reportage about the genocide in Rwanda. And that's a measure of Lorenzo's ability to tackle topic as serious as that.
And I was very happy if I could
And
make
I
a very
actually-
serious illustration, very dramatic.
And I remember having
because
a conversation with Philip Gorovich, who fortunately, was able to listen to me and said, but this is hardcore reportage. Like, I don't want an impressionistic, I want something. I said, you have photos for this. So we actually put in photos by Gilles Perez of some of the things that he was recommending that he was talking about. But, I explained the job of the artist is not to do a photorealistic, but to give you a sense of what it was like. And it's better done with a more abstract, faceless peoples and blurry photographs, which obviously will not exist. Like emotionally, you can bring your reader into your story much more. And fortunately, the editors at the New Yorker were not used to having the stories illustrated, but I think it really helped the reach of the article to have images such as this. So I'm going to move pretty fast because this is more New Yorker covers. This is the one that I think about every time, right now, we just entered a new decade. And for me, this is the image about looking toward the future. Every January 1st, I want an image just like this. This one was the one for 20 years ago for the year 2000, looking into the future. I love the way Lorenzo's work marries the past and the future. Like, it's very classical in its sources and inspiration. And other images, but I want to get to, sorry.
Yeah, this is a series after the cover, New Yorker cover. In the same period, I was working for Le Monde, a supplement, a magazine inside about literature, pocket literature. So they gave me, every month gave me a book, also a classic book that were going on, that was published in pocket. And for me, it was a very, also a good, work, moment of learn, a good school, because I decided to make not big portrait, but all the images must be very, very composed. So for me, it was a school of compositing. Every work I had, it was for me the possibility to learn new things, you know.
Which I mean, unfortunately, we can't even begin to talk about you as a painter. This is fascinating, but I just want to show some of your black and white sketches to get to the Hansel and Gretel images that at some point I was putting together an exhibit for Galerie Met, which was a gallery started by Dodi Kinzenjian, one of my colleagues at the New Yorker, for the Metropolitan Opera. And there was a production of the Hansel and Gretel opera, and at that time I asked a number of artists to do their artwork on that theme, and a number of people came through, including Lorenzo, did those extraordinary suite of extraordinary black and white images, which since have become a number of things, including a book of Hansel and Gretel with text by Neil Gaiman that I ended up publishing 5 or 6 years ago, and also the kind of the opening images to your movie. And I'm sorry to be rushing through because it's so fascinating.
But
I want to make sure
that
we get to the movie a little bit.
We have to speak about the movie?
Yeah.
It's very late. Sorry, my work is too big.
It's too interesting.
But you must think that behind every images there is not, how do you say, there is always a story behind. If I arrive to make this forest of Hansel and Gretel that you have seen, is because 5 years ago, before you asked me, I went to Patagonia, and I make a long walking in the forest of Patagonia forest. And I was touched very much about the form of the trees, very dramatic. So when I come back in the hotel, I start very quick to make this form in black and white. I return in Paris and I start to make painting, mainly abstract, about forest and the light go inside the forest. But they were really abstract. For me, it was very important. It was a subject of painting, not illustration. And when Françoise asked me to make Hansel and Gretel, I say, I didn't want to make classic illustration. I say, I thought, I'm making forest, Hansel and Gretel, forest. So I asked, maybe I can use this forest. Yes, okay. So I put 2 little characters inside the forest, and for miracle, it was a miracle, the images that were abstract, that were landscape, become to be narrative, become to be a new way for me to narrate some stories. And so I did very quick, because it was 4 years I did
Sorry, I moved too fast through the images. Can you put back the last few images of I should have not move so fast. But just
We can come back? No, this is the town.
so yeah, so we can go past that.
You can go.
Yeah.
These
Thank
are,
you.
well, you can see, if you get out the characters, it's like an abstract forest, you know, in black and white, like expressionism, abstract. And I put the character, and quick became a story. And so
And
it
it's
was
used-
4
yeah,
years
yeah.
I was doing improvising in the black and white. So for me it was very easy after to make 6. They are very big. They are 1 meter and for 70 centimeter. And for me it was so easy to in the end narrate a story only with the brush and the black. It was a new happiness for me to find a new way to express and to narrate some stories.
Yeah, and after like really amazing use of color in your paintings and in your drawing, it was so exciting to see how rich your black and white could be. I mean, it's become like one of my favorite modes of your drawings. Sorry, so we should now go to the movie because it's an animation festival, and I assume some of you might be interested in the movie. So do you want to?
So I very quick. My relation with animation film, it's also here is for a long period. I started to make a little, very short animation for television, and the first big possibility was to work a pilot of a Pinocchio for Enzo Dalò. I made. And the most important maybe collaboration was when Antonioni, Wong Kar-wai, and Soderbergh asked me to make the, how do you say, the l'Eliant?
The in-between sequences.
Yes, the sequence in between one episode, one story, another story of a film named Eros. And it's the last film of Antonioni, in fact. It was a film of 3 episodes by Wong Kar-wai, Soderbergh, and Antonioni. But they have the problem to make the between.
Yeah.
And they asked me to make animation inside. Luckily, I have all a series of erotic subject. Erotic, very light, erotic. And so I have the confidence of these big directors, and so they push me to make something in the cinema. After I have another good experience about to make a black and white story, very mysterious, about the fear of darks, la peur du noir.
Yeah, it's called Fear of the Dark in English.
Yes.
It was a French production from
Yes,
Prima
Valérie
Linea.
Sherman, the same producer that produced the Bears.
And bringing together a few artists, some Americans, some Europeans, and each doing like a take in the form of animations that he or she wanted. So Lorenzo.
So
Richard
I
McGuire,
did.
a number
It
of
was
others.
a very important animation experience, and after 2 or 3 years, Valérie Sherman asked me if I have the possibility to make a long film, what story I could choose, what I would like to make. So I gave her to read the famous Birds in Vision of Sicily, and she likes so much.
And
So we decided
it is
to,
like you had done Pinocchio, it is like a fable, so not
Yes.
the fables that everybody knows. Like with Hansel and Gretel, you didn't need to tell the story because everybody knows the story, Little Red Riding Hood and so on. But Zadi came up with the fables that you also had to tell the story because it's not...
Yeah, Buzzati, it was very important for me because he made illustration, he was painting, he was writers, and make a story very mysterious and strange stories. Also, he made a graphic novel, a sort of poem of graphic novel in the 69, and influenced me so much in the way to narrate the story. And this is a big fable. It tells a very incredible big of fantasy or imaginary. So we start, well, this is the beginning. I think you have seen the film, I don't know. At the beginning, the problem, I start to say the problem. I thought it was easy to make this book because we had the draw of Buzzati, we had a very beautiful story, but in fact, when you start to make the treatment for the film, you start to see all the problems. And the book, it was very complicated. Inside the book, there are many characters. And for example, we understood that there were not women in the story. There were not a girl, there were not a woman. And he had in his style, he always speak with his readers, with the children. Always, it's like a narrator that speak, oh, you know, my friend, there is this legend, you know these kind of things, what do you think? So he's a narrator that always speak with his public. So we decided to invent the situation of the narration. Inside the classic figure that is in Italy is named Cantastorie. Cantastorie was a man, was someone that went to a village, to another village in the beginning, in the 18, to tell the story in the villages. He walked with a guitar or maybe a accordion, and he had, like this, yes, a panel where he drew the story. And he made a song, like a poem, a song about the story, singing and like a poetry, narrate the story.
The story in image.
All the story, but also chronic, fait divers, si tu veux.
Yeah, like also the news events.
So
And
we used Gedeone e Almerina, Gedeone that is around the village, and with a little assistant, a little girl. And they go around to village in Sicily, but it's very cold. There is the snow. They found a cover.
A cave.
A cave. Go inside to warm them.
You worked on this film for like 7 years? Or
6 years.
6
yes,
years.
I work with Thomas Bidegain and Jean-Luc Fromental. Thomas Bidegain is the scenarist, the writers of Jacques Audiard, a great director, a French director. And here there are some examples. These are the images of Buzzati, and I try to use the maximum, the most taken by the Buzzati illustration. And
Dis-moi,
some
votre
idea
film.
came really from the
C'est
book.
comment d'être mort.
This is the example. This is the ghost. There are many strange creatures inside. There are ghosts. This is il gatto, le marmousè, il gatto mammone, and this is the draw of Buzzati, and after there is.
You show it in the movie on.
Yes,
Prime,
we put in the film. This is my interpretation. I try to be the most respected. I try to respect the maximum.
Yes, but it's
Buzzati.
also in your universe. It's
The animation. And this is the Serpenton dei Mari, the snake, the sea snakes. Yeah, snakes. Yeah, and well, you can see that I try to.
I just love that.
To use here the detail of the draw of Buzzati, and here our reinterpretation. Evidently, we had to make a big show, big spectacular. Must be spectacular. Is how I used the trees of Buzzati, and we make the forest. There are very little draw and little idea, but helped me so much to create this world of this fantastic world. This is a very little draw, and you can see the clouds, the cut, the mountain. I say it's a really graphic idea. So I used and we use many mountain cut by the snow. Evidently, I try to use a maximum the space, the cinema, the space of the cinema, of the film, the big landscapes, big deepness, the perspective, and the color. Also, I try to put my culture, my Mediterranean culture. I try to make a story with the references of the Italian painting, metaphysical, the Chirico metaphysic. Also, to make the cave, I show to my artist, collaborator, the painting of Beato Angelico or Giotto, how they make in a graphic way the caves or the rocks, So I try to use the maximum my Italian culture to create a iconography original for this story. This is a series of background, you can see how we organize the space.
It's an enormous amount of work. Like, how many people did you have working for you?
At a certain moment, we were, I think, 120. We work in Paris and Angoulême, in two different studios, and also there were a studio in Hungary, Hungary, and. Yes, you had to understand that the animation film is a very slow work, very slow, very methodic. I really work with the big talents that the only idea is to be methodic. They are always concentrated in the details.
How will someone walk from here to there?
Yes, only. I have my assistant that was able to see if one head of these people didn't move well. Say, there is something. How you can see that? Yes, look, tack, tack.
It's an amazing thing.
Is people that is able to see the invisible.
But your job was to actually like unify all this, like Buzzati's universe, Giotto paintings, 120 like people from
Yes, but
in
we can
different
put
places,
together everything.
yeah.
Must be fusion, you know, by my experience. I have much more problem to to write the story, to have the rhythm of the story, because I didn't have
But that you
big
worked with script writers before
yes,
you
but
started
I didn't
drawing
have big
it.
experience.
Yeah.
It was important to work with the storyboarder for writers. It was very important to work with the collaborator. Very
Well,
good.
you had to figure out who the characters were and the structure of the story and how much of Buzzati you were going to keep and adding like a little girl, all this, and then you were able to like visually like develop this whole.
Yeah, but I started very quick to draw because I'm not able to judge only by the text. For me, the text you can change and change and change and all that. I was obliged for me to draw a little storyboard very quick to understand if I have the idea of the sequences. I was a comic artist, so I'm used to draw my story, so and I can understand if it's working or not. Also, if there are two very different languages, but I have to draw to judge, you know. So very quick, I started to make many sketches about characters, about the ambience, about the story.
So your pre-storyboard is what you show?
Yes, my first draw, they are very primitive, very quick, but for me it was enough. After there is the draw of the storyboardist, and after there is the start of animation, the animator.
Was there any major changes after the storyboard? Est-ce que ça a beaucoup changé après le premier storyboard?
In the end, not much. In the end, I have seen that some sequences really are the same, better and better. But the first idea for more than half of the film, more, maybe, they are the original.
And how long
reinterpreted, but
in your 6 years, at what time did you have the storyboard?
After 3 years and a half.
So half the time.
Yeah, because we changed many times, and there is a moment that we try to make in 3D, because the techniques is a 2D, is drawn. But
yeah, it should be mentioned. This is hand animations. This is not like created the 3D. You tried this at some point.
Yes, we tried to use the 3D techniques, and we make one pilot in 3D. So, but in the end, it was, in a way, too much expensive for us. To have a very good quality, and luckily we didn't do, because I think that 3D is always too much esclave of the techniques.
A slave of the technique.
Because
in 3D animation, you know much better than I do, but maybe because I don't know that much, I only understand that in 3D animation, you have to get the CGI to build basically a model, so everybody has to sculpt
models, but
each character.
Yes, so but they speak also of the texture of the. So in 3D, we were in 2D, we were more free to be more poetic, to be the background, to make the background in a very free way, to use the landscape and the space in a way more free.
I think it shows actually that,
and
like,
it's more,
you know, CGI films, one that I've done with 3D, are focused on those characters because it's expensive to build those characters with a little bit of background.
Yes, and also with so many different background. We have so many different ambience in the film. So probably we would be obliged to be more strict, you know, to don't
and here,
to have not have the possibility to develop everything.
And here in the sketches that you gave to your team, you could decide the light and the color and the mood of it.
It's a dialogue. I made many draw, but they are all open draw. They are always not finished draw. Because in my idea, you have seen some draw I did. In my idea, the draw is the beginning. And after with my team, they developed in the way I want. But the light, the color could be changed. We put all the detail inside. So. Really, I made the draw of beginning, the style, the idea, and after is a really rich dialogue with my team, with the artist I work, and the film began to be really a cathedral. You know, you have the sculpture, you have the come si dice, I falegnami, they work with the woods, there are the painting, so the cathedral is done by many people. I was only the architect. Maybe I used the architecture for this to control that don't go down all the film, you know,
That's very
and
modest of you, but I
the
mean,
direction.
Yes, it gives the vision. Like, I just want to make sure that we keep enough time for questions.
How much we have?
This is recording. How much time do we have left?
La peur.
This is an example of the recording the voice.
De fantômes à leurs enfants.
And this is the little Almerina.
Ça dépend des fantômes.
C'est ce que je leur dis. Mais enfin, ceux du château de Roche-des-Monts étaient particulièrement terrifiants. Devant ces spectres, même les squelettes claquaient des dents.
Voilà. No, this go on. This is very stupid. You have seen Thomas made Gedeon is also the writers, the screenplay, and the little girl is Leila Betty, that is a very good actress, French actress.
And you record the voices first, and then they animate
Yes.
to the timing of the voice. Like,
Yes,
so
and also for the
basically
expression.
The story is told.
Also for the energy, the animator are very used to. They are helped by the voices because they can put energy inside the expression of the characters, and not only for the moving of but also for the movement of the characters. So we record always the voice before to make the really animations. This is another example how to start from my sketches, and this is completely different. It's not, but there are other, and then all the step of to pass to the color and the final. If you go on, there are others. This is my sketch where there is the idea, and after now the organization of the space, the shadows. There are all the steps. If you go on, we start the color and the details, and after the material and some other details. To arrive to the final background, there are many steps, and these for all the images of the film, so you can understand that it is very slow, very methodic, and is a crazy work. Well, these are always here some example also. And we use the 3D, in fact, for the snake, sea serpent, sea serpent, and also for the little birds that you have seen, they're running everywhere. This was impossible to make in 2D, so we used the 3D, but mixed with the texture of 2D, you know, the color. This is the 2D animation that help us to make the movement. And this is how we make the sea. At the beginning, it was more a mess. But at a certain moment, I've started to see there were a sort of perspective inside the waves. So I asked to the big talent that make this the special effect to go for in this direction. So we make this sea that gave us also a big deepness, you see, with this perspective. It's a graphic idea of the sea, it's not realistic at all. So if you have some question, because I think we have finished.
Okay. Yes?
I'm a fan of Marc Chagall, like everybody else, and I was surprised that when he illustrated his wife's books, Bella Chagall, he used black and white. And there's another, a poet that he illustrated black and white. And I'm wondering why you chose black and white for the Hansel and Gretel. Was that the final? Because I've heard black and white is more intimate and it's more dramatic. But I'm wondering what your reason was.
Well, I used black and white at the beginning of my career because the comic artists were obliged to use black and white because they were not all for the printing. So the black and white, all the time, in my sketchbook, I make black and white. And the black and white is, for me, sometimes I make the example of a singer that is thinking about a song and start to make a song on the piano or with the guitar, a simple guitar. But he heard all the instrument inside. So with the piano, he makes everything. For me, the black and white is like to play the piano, you know? In the black and white, there are all the notes, all the chords, but they are... So, you are right. Also, there is an intimistic dimension inside. It's very direct about the improvisation. I like the black and white when I'm improvising. And there is also a big work of mine that is improvising in my sketch. So, as I said, the forest I did, it was a part of me near of the improvising, near of a gestual, expressionist painting, and there was the coincidence to when, and for me, Hansel and Gretel is in black and white, and in these images, really, I try to put my remembering when I was young. I remember when I discovered a book of Hansel and Gretel when I was very little, and all the faces of the witch were closed, covered, covered by me because I think it was terrible. So Hansel and Gretel, yes, could be colored, but this black and white, not for me. For me, the Hansel and Gretel is the forest, is two children that lost in the forest. Could be a city. They are lost in their
Actually,
reality.
when we published it as a book, I did some research and found out that it dates back to the Great Famine of 1435 in Europe, where there was a small event of like climate disruption, and people started eating their grain and didn't have anything to plant, and eventually led old people to go lose themselves in the forest so that there wouldn't be like one more mouse to feed, and eventually got maybe not parents to lose their children in the forest, cannibalism, like a third of the European population died. And
Yes.
that's the root of that story. It's like hunger so dire that your grandparents like sacrifice themselves, that like parents like abandon their kids. So
And I remember that there were some discussion about how can you make so dark illustration for children, black and white children. To the children, you don't have to be.
yeah, it's a conversation
black
that
and-
we had at the time about like, oh, should children's books stay away from those very instinctive fears? And as Lorenzo said, like, well, children are afraid, and a book can actually experience fear, like raw, terrifying fear, and a book can actually offer a way to look at it and deal with it.
The possibility to feel some emotion, but they are very lucky. They can see a book with a strong emotion in their bed with the mothers, and if they don't want to see, they closed, but after 2 days they go to see again because they like. So I think it's important to make a mysterious book, a book that speak about fear, speak about strong emotion, because the book gave the possibility to touch some emotion that they have to know, you know? So I think they are lucky if they can understand some emotion with the book and not in the reality. In the reality of the strong reality, I say.
You want to take one more question?
Actually, I have another question about colors. So I've been impressed by your kind of unusual and strong color palettes in your images. So like, how do you select colors? Do they come naturally, or is there a thought process or some kind of rules when you select colors? You just compared the drawing in black and white to playing the piano. Then is painting in colors like kind of a orchestration to you?
Yes,
Comment
right,
est-ce que tu choisis
like
tes
a symphony. A colored images is like a symphony. You can use the strong trumpet. You can use a very sweet nuance, very sweet with the violin. You can put little things with the flute. And oblige me. I think also that color is a communication for more people, a bigger public. But I can't explain color. I can explain composition, I can explain many things, but for me it's very difficult to explain by I put a red one, a black. I know that it's important that there are a light coming. The light put a big yellow and a red, but there is also the shadows, you know. The shadows and the dark give potential.
The potential, sorry.
Give puissance, give
The power, yeah.
power to the color. Is always there is not one yellow all the time. It depends near the yellow what we put. And sometimes the same yellow is very bad, very sad, very, and the same yellow near other color is very lighting, very strong. So is a sort of balance of how you put together the color.
I actually have one artist that I work with at the New Yorker who is colorblind. And as an art student, he didn't even know he was colorblind because he, not having been diagnosed, he can't see red. No, it's somebody else. But
okay.
but he actually learned to read what it does to the other colors, because it's a matter of wavelength. So even though he can't see it, he can see the effect that it has on the blues and on the colors that he can't see. And now that I know that he's colorblind, I keep looking at his images that are all in color. I mean, he's also very good in black and white, but it's true that what Lorenzo said, it's a matter of like what each color does to, in the ensemble. Do we have time for another question?
One last one.
Okay. And there's also, I think you brought a book, so if the conversation is going to have to end, but there is a book that the Cultural Institute, the Italian Cultural Institute, when they put an exhibit together. So it doesn't have everything that Lorenzo has done, because that would take like more like 50 books, but it has his images for the New Yorker and his sketches. And
yeah, it's done by, thank you to Melania and Giorgio Van Straten that helped us to make this book 2 years ago, or 3? 2 years ago, yes.
Last question?
This isn't the question, but pardon me, as long as you're presenting the book, is that for purchase? Because I'd like to buy one.
It's downstairs. Yeah,
I see.
It's available downstairs.
The question I was going to ask, I was so fascinated by the bears, and I ashamedly admit that I've never seen it. I have a two-part question. One, is there somewhere I could see the series? And secondly, with your great talent, are you working on a new project?
Est-ce que ton film va être montré à New York? So right now there's no distribution for the film yet, but obviously the producers and Pathé is in charge of the distribution. We all hope that
We hope to find a distributor in United States. We found many other, is distributed in many other country, but in this moment there is no distribution.
But it will be, I mean,
We hope.
inevitably. And the last question is, are you working on any other big project right now?
No, for the moment, no. The only, what I really want in this moment is to go in my studio and to begin to make painting, because it's a long time I don't do that. So to refine the pleasure to use the color and the brush on the canvas, all alone,
Not with 120 people.
No, not. But it was a pleasure for me to work with many other talents.
Although
But
I have to say, last night or 2 nights ago, when we were talking, you're saying, "Oh, maybe like we could do something with Hansel and Gretel." And
yeah, there is always this sirena. What's this?
the muse.
The news that I'll come again, come again. I asked to my wife to
tie you to the mast.
To tie me on the, if I say I want to go to make animation.
No, she will.
So I don't know really what to do in the future. In the moment to
Yeah,
get
I think we should all worry about Lorenzo not knowing what to do next. That's
one-
a great
one
problem.
One thing I did was to prepare a cover for the New Yorker and waiting
That's
to
true.
snow.
So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Françoise Mouly. Thank you also.